schedule very strictly, I asked the participants, the contributors, to keep the time regime and not exceed speaking more than 20 minutes. So we will start now with Oksana Biaslepkina-Kharnakiewicz's contribution. Oksana is associate professor at the Department of Literary Criticism at Belarusian State University. Her expertise is in Belarusian literature and culture. In 2003, she published a monograph together or separately on the history of the Society of the Locals, Tutejsia. And she's also the author of a short introduction into Belarusian literature. Her contribution today has the title, The Soviet Literary Institutions in Modern Belarus, an attempt to return. Oksana, please, the floor is yours.
I'm sorry, but as I see, Oksana is not with us. Maybe she has some problem with connection. Maybe we can switch the order. I'm not sure.
Probably we should wait a minute then.
Yes.
Let's wait a minute. And if she doesn't return, we will continue with Kapitolina Fyodorova. What a pity. It's always the same.
She is coming back right now, so.
Great. Yeah. Oksana, welcome back. Go ahead, please. We cannot hear you. Yeah.
I lost you. Okay. I'm very sorry. The title of my paper is The Soviet Literary Institution in Modern Belarus, I mean contemporary Belarus, and attempt to return. I tried to demonstrate my presentation. Do you see? Okay. Do you see me? Do you hear me? Everything is okay?
Yes, everything is perfect. Please go ahead.
So once it's necessary to note an attempt of return of what? What were the literary institutions in Belarus in the Soviet time? How was the right legitimized there, and what was changed, and what has changed in our time? What did the authorities try to recycle? In Belarus, there were an attempt to recycle writers' union as a state institution. It was in Soviet time. Why did the authorities, Belarusian officials, feel nostalgia for Soviet literary process and its...
Oksana, please closer to the microphone. A little bit closer to the microphone.
I can do it. Okay, it will be better?
Better.
So why did authorities and Belarusian officials decide make Belarusian literature great again, as it was in USSR? I will talk about four institutions. The main is writers' unions, but first three explained why our authorities try to recycle writers' unions. So the first one, educational and scientific institutions. What the same and what the different from the Soviet literary process, and what had been recycled. Now we have modern content of literary education at school, Andrei. I will talk about school curriculum. At school, there are two literatures, Belarusian and Russian. Concerned to Belarusian literature, there is a new concept of the Belarusian literary process as multilingual in Latin, Polish, and Belarusian languages. Not in Russian. There are Belarusian Russian-speaking writers, but in education, Russian language is in Russian literature. This separation is from Soviet time. Almost all schools are public, state, but young pupils in private school study literature on state curriculum, state program. I know that in Russia, for example, there are many versions of textbooks. Another situation is in Belarus. They have the only textbook and common program for all pupils, as it was in Soviet Union. But in Soviet Union, all writers were right. Now in Belarus, many writers are wrong. So the last writer in school curriculum studied monographic is Evgenia Yanishits, died in 1988. I'm afraid people think all those writers are died. And a few modern writers are in extracurricular reading, but people are not required to read it. It wasn't only recycling in Belarusian literary education, it's our educational tradition without interruption. Science, researchers in the Academy of Science decided who would be a classic writer in Soviet time, who would receive the state award, who would be officially recognized. Why is this moment important? It wasn't possible to be realized as a writer outside of state institutions or any writer in the USSR. If in Soviet Russia there was a concept of self-publishing, in Belarus the number of such texts was meager. So at least after the collapse of the USSR, there were no new names discovered except for immigrants, Massin and others. There were writers who didn't recognize by the authorities, but they were known in the literary process, like Larissa Geniush. And now in Belarus, for their dissertation, you can choose only permitted authors, but nobody knows who they are. And in other genres, scientific genres, you can research anyone writer. If we take the academic study of Soviet Belarusian literature, the classics are those who received state awards. That is the reason to become a classic writer. After 1930s, and you can check yourself. Kupala received many awards, and without the awards, is he a classic? Yeah. And Menish? Yeah. And Starakevich? Yeah. But if you take the last volume of this, the history of Belarusian literature of 20th century, many questions may arise. Why all those authors are there? Nowadays, state literary prizes were not awarded to those people who represented the literary process. So state award system doesn't work as it did in Soviet time. Later, non-state awards appeared. One of the most influential is the Jerzy Giedroyc Award, but their laureates also didn't represent the Belarusian literature process, but the shortlist just collected the best prose writers. But this is the only influential award in Belarusian literary process. The prize is near $10,000. For comparison, we have the award worth a bucket of honey, $10,000 and bucket of honey. Next, institutions, literary media, newspapers, and magazines. According to the state media and non-state, media and non-state awards, how can media discuss the winner of the biggest award, non-state award? It depends on his personality. He's because there wasn't female winner, it seems to me. Now we have a new problem. Who is right and who is wrong for state media? In Soviet times, there wasn't such problem. Why? In the Soviet Union, young writers led to newspapers, literary pages of newspapers, to the literary magazines, and all of them were also public state, which influenced the themes and form of creativity. Almost all Soviet classics are realists, as they were then called socialistic realists. The themes of creativity were either relevant to the state or safe for writers. For example, one of the best classical works, the Polesky Chronicle by Ivan Menesh, occurred only after the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, when the cult of personality of Stalin was condemned. So, unfortunately, in Soviet times, Belarusian literature and many stereotypes about itself. Like the main themes in Belarusian literature are the Second World War and the village countryside life. These stereotypes live on now, and they are also supported by the school curriculum, I think. Andrei Moskvin will probably talk about it today. Why did writers play by these rules? The Russian writers played by these rules of creativity because recently in 1930s, our literary process lost almost all writers. So some were repressed. Maxim Harensky, Vasil Nostovsky, Mikhail Zareski, Ales Dodar, Anatoly Volin, Todor Klitschko, Ales Zvonak, and many others. Some disappeared in hiding from repression. Natalia Vishnevska, Arina Hlinska. It was easy for women by getting married and changing name. They went away from Belarus and became Russian-speaking authors like Arina Hlinska. So there were rules for all. In contemporary Belarus, the writers can choose the place for their publications: state, non-state, internet without any fees. Next moment, publishing houses. In Soviet time, after publication in newspapers and magazines and recognition by state critics, the writer became worthy of his or her books being published by a state publishing house. It was a slow process, and that's why the joke about young 50 years old writers in Belarusian literature. Yesterday, Bradley Gorsky talked about Lyudmila Ulitskaya, who took her first book in 50 years old. After the publication of the first book and receiving positive responses by critics, the second book could be published faster. Who became the classic writing of Belarusian Soviet literature? Those authors who wrote in such a way that their works were approved by state critics. Today we can say that almost all authors who became classics in the Soviet era remained them in the post-Soviet time. There is another current stereotype about Belarusian writers, that they are people from poor peasant families. The origins of Belarusian writers may have been different, but in Soviet times, especially in the last Soviet time, Belarusian writers were rich, influential people. Rich, influential men. Why influential? They held public offices. They had the parliament. They were deputies and officials. Maxim Pank, Ivan Navumrika, Ivan Shemyakin, and many others. There is an interesting point because the right at the head of the parliament in Soviet time was a person who had a safe publicity. The whole country knows him. All children study his work at school, but he didn't have political subjectivity, as it should have been. As the official helped any person get an apartment flat, the person remembered, the writer helped me, the writer gave me an apartment, and I think that's important pattern of behavior. Let me remind you that our Nobel laureate, Svetlana Alexievich, a Soviet writer, bought an apartment for a large family for a part of her award to confirm this stereotype about writers' power as it was in Soviet time. And Soviet writers were really rich. Small number of writers received state awards, after which a special coefficient appeared. All subsequent fees were increased several times. Sometimes this led to deception. For example, the writer Maxim Luzhanin published the text of his wife, Evgenia Klembaum, as his own because he was more honored, and therefore the family received more income. But the national language was more important than money for many writers. There were more fees for texts in the Russian language. There's a well-known story when the Russian translator of the classic writer Yakov Helensky received a fee 3 times higher than the writer. After this, he suggested Kulyashov to write in Russian himself, but the Russian writer refused. And it was best decision for his heritage. We have no tradition to research and study the works by the Russian-speaking writers. Some writers solved this moment with money and fees by SRI translations or by family work on translation. For example, Ivan Shemyakin's wife was a doctor, but when her husband became a famous writer, she got philological education and became his translator. 2 of his 4 children also got philological education and became his translators too. Wealth had a paradox in the Soviet Union. It was impossible to spend this money on a luxury life. Nowadays, it's all impossible. Fiction writing in Belarus isn't profession. Maybe there is another situation with playwriting and drama spin-offs. Next institution and domain. Writers' Union. After the collapse of the USSR, the Writers' Union was separated from the state, both financially and ideologically. It was a catastrophe for the writers' generation. You can write about it in works of Ivan Shemyakin and Viktor Peskov, for example, but it was a new chance for those who wanted to be independent from the state, the younger writers' generation, for example. Writers' Union lost all property at those years. Elder writer generation have nostalgia feelings for Soviet times. Big peace, influence, awards, solving household issues, writer status in society. And the authorities and the Belarusian authorities also have nostalgia feelings for Soviet times, for predictable writers, for discipline in culture. If in Soviet times there was one channel of transmitting information, there are some also the same also in television, in the school program, and in lectures on the Bureau of Agitation and Propaganda. Then in post-Soviet times, there were many of such channels, and that is why there was and is a subjective impression that we have no such great writers as they were in Soviet Union. In Soviet times, we had ranks, the national poet and the national writer, and now we haven't any such ranks and any national poets and any national writers. All of them died. And 15 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the authorities began turning their attention to the Writers' Union as an important sphere of influence, they think. And it was decided to recycle the Soviet literary institution, Writers' Union. It was real recycling, I think, because the idea became trash. In 2006, a new Writers' Union was formed, and it took the name from the old one, non-state. And now we have 2 unions of writers. And it's funny because we talk about Belarusian had 2 souls, 2 alphabet, 2 graphic, 2 grammars, 2 religion denomination, and so on. And now we have 2 union of writers. The old non-state union of Belarusian writers and the new state union of writers of Belarus. In just a few years, more than 500 writers, members, have been gathered for a new Writers' Union. While the generation has expectation that the Soviet situation would be repeated. I don't think that anyone could hope to get an apartment from the state as it was in the Soviet Union, but they could hope for assistance with the publications of books, hope for literary awards, maybe some thoughts about promotion. The balance of writers became next. In the state union, there are mostly Russian-speaking authors. Well-known Belarusian-speaking authors who joined the new union did so out of career interest as they worked in state agencies. And this transition between Writers' Union was a necessary, highly desirable step for them. How serious was the ideological division? Probably not very serious. There were families where the husband was in one union and his wife was in another, or father in one and his son in another. Although the unions different, predominantly ideologically, many other values of them were commonly conservative. Women's issue, rights and hierarchy issues, and so on. There were secondary rights in the new state union, so they began to use administrative methods in their literary process. State literary magazines and publishing houses continued to publish more talented writers, no matter what union they were in. And more often, they were authors from the non-state union. And the question was asked, why state institutions promote works by authors?
Oksana, you should come to the conclusion now, please.
Okay. And there were some language conflicts, moral conflicts, and financial conflicts, because the award system wasn't clear there. So I haven't time. So I think that the recycling of these Soviet institutions wasn't successful. It became clear that the main reason why it made sense to be there was ideological. And why it wasn't successful? Three reasons. First, financial. Then the second was the decentralization of the Russian literary process. The decision to create new writers' union was made by the older generation of officials, but early in the 21st century, we have internet in Belarus, so try to monopolize literary process, it was a fantasy. And the third reason of unsuccessful attempt, I think, colonial identity. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Oksana, for this very useful insight into the current situation of Belarusian literature and situation of publishing houses and societies and so on. If we would like to change the program in order to save some time for discussion, we could propose Kapitolina and Andrei change places, because it could be useful to discuss Oksana's contribution and Andrei's together. Kapitolina, would this be okay for you?
Sure. Yeah, that was my thought, actually.
Yeah, okay. And Andrei, for you also? Great. So I will briefly introduce now Andrei Moskvin. It's not necessary to introduce him, first of all, because he is one of the co-organizers of this conference, but still, Andrei Moskvin is a professor at Warsaw University, and he is one of the most distinguished experts in Belarusian theater, avant-garde theater, first of all, Belarusian theater of the 1920s to 30s, and he has published extensively on topics related to it, articles as well as bookland studies. Today, his contribution is on textbooks on Belarusian literature, creating a new canon or a return to Sovietism. Andrei, please.
Yes, and one moment. Okay, and where is my text? I must find my text. Okay. During the existence of Soviet Union, literature experts for short period of time was closely related to power and politics, and quite often even depends on it. Power not only created, but even dictated a framework within which literature should function. Usually this process were conditioned by political and social events. For example, 1917, the October Revolution, 1924, 1929, the process of Belarusiization, and so on and so on. When in 1991 changes began in Belarus in all areas of life, including culture and education, it seems the situation of Belarusian literature would change. Previously forbidden literature works would be published. The program of the course, the history of Belarusian literature in school and universities would be changed. The canon of Belarusian literature will be modified. And authors will be finally be independent of ideology. Partly it did, but only for a very short time. Very quickly, starting in 1996, the Belarusian authorities began to put pressure on the intelligentsia, especially artists and writers. The Union of Writers of Belarus function in Belarus was forced to change its name to Union of Belarusian Writers. This took place in accordance with the decision of rules for the use of the word Belarus. And the following year, the Union of Belarusian Writers was deprived of its property rights, the Writers' House. And in 2002, the association was, the union was deprived of all literary publications, the magazine Polemia, Молодость, Niemen, Krynica, and Belarus, and weekly literature and art, Literatura и Мастатство. In 2005, the Union of Belarusian Writers split. A small group of writers left it to set up a new organization, the Union of the Writers of Belarus. It is headed by a writer and a screenwriter, the chairman of the Committee of International Affairs and National Security of the Belarusian Parliament, Nikolai Turgenev. Third great writers of different generations, like Ryhor Baradulin, Nil Gilevich, Oleg Razanov, Vladimir Nekляев, Viktor Kaysko, Anatoly Vertinsky, Vladimir Orlov, Vasily Zoyonek, did not move to a new union, but stayed in the old one. It should be emphasized that the Union of Writers does not have any financial support from the power. It works usually on grants. In the same year, the President, Minister of Education of the Republic of Belarus, Alexander Redsko, issues an order forbidding the organization of meetings in schools, universities, and libraries with members of the unofficial union. And the Ministry of Justice of Republic of Belarus has brought an action against in order to resolve it. However, this process is losing, and the Union of Writers has the capacity to operate to this day. It should be emphasized that during the 25 years of the President of Republic of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, Alexander Lukashenko was quite critical about activities of the Union of Belarusian Writers and the function of literature magazine and the work of individual writers. The president was also critical, Vasil Bykov, it was in 1994. On December in 1997, at the meeting with intelligentsia, the president said, "I didn't expect any pressure for the first 5 years, but today I should say, the state will only support the mass media and writers, which will implement the state policy." In 2003, Lukashenko, during the meeting with Belarusian intelligence, made a clear division among the intellectual elite. Today, our state needs honest artists, patriots in the true sense of the word, of this word, who are not afraid of the truth and dedicated talent to the motherland and nation. At the meeting in 2007, with Russian journalist Lukashenko said, "On my initiative, all nationalists, the so-called writers, disappeared from the school book of the Belarusian literature. Nationalism is a great evil. We started fighting him a long time ago. It is a very important part because it is you now understand what happened in Belarus during from 1994 till 2007. And now I would like to tell about the program of the Belarusian literature. And you see the corner of the different book published last 6th, 7th year, and first of all, I would like to tell that it was very difficult to change the program of the Belarusian literature, and the first steps was in 1991 when one of the book appeared. In 1994 when one of the book appeared new. It was at the beginning. I would like to say it's very important two kinds of the book: a book for the 9th grade and book for the 10th grade, because in the book for the 9th grade there are old Belarusian literature from the beginning, from the old period until the Soviet time, and another book for the 10th grade there are Belarusian literature of 20th century. And you see how looks periodization of the Belarusian theater in the Soviet time. It is only 3 periods. It is very the old period and the new period and the Soviet period, and it is necessary to change. And the first step was did only in 1996, but not in the book, but in the Chrestomati. It is in the book of different texts of Belarusian writers. And here you can see a big number of writers which were for the first time published in the book: Karatkevich, Vertinsky, Ptashnikov, and so on and so on, Orlov, Yanishchits, and so on. Another there are very famous writers of the book. One of them, Ryhor Shkraba, and his book, the first book, it is the history of the Soviet literature. The first edition of this book was published in 1972, and every year this book was printed again and again during the 20 years till 1992. Ryhor Shkraba worked. He was connected with literature, but he worked not in the Academy of Science or in university. He connected with magazine Polemy, Fire, and in 1972 was organized a competition for the best textbook for school, and he was the winner of this competition. And from that time, this book was #1 in Belarus for the 10 grades. And another book was and also very important, these two persons, Vasil Ivashin and Mikhail Lazaruk. They was the author of the book for the 9th grade. They also published their book every year. And in 1997, they have opportunity to little change these textbooks for school. And now you see there are 9 different periods. Like you remember the first one of the first slides when there were only 3 periods in Belarusian literature, and now we have 9 different periods. It's very important to say. The next steps are very important, connected with Vladimir Niklaev. Maybe a lot of you know this very famous Belarusian poet and writer. In 1989, he organized literature magazine, Krynica, The Source, and he organized very interesting people around this magazine. This magazine published till 2002. And the first I think, for my mind, the best textbook of Belarusian literature was published in 1997, printed by this publish house, Krynica. It was possible because it was time when not only one textbook for school was have opportunity to be published. It was the period when concurrence was very important. The next step is also very important to change the program of this of the Belarusian literature, not only in the school but in the university. And 2000 year very important because the program by Lyudmila Finkova in Alice Pashkevich. Lyudmila Finkova is a professor of Belarusian State University. Alice Pashkevich is a doctor at the same department of Belarusian literature. They prepared, I think, it's the best program, and especially not only the history, the old Belarusian literature, but modern literature, especially 20 years and after 1991. But we have, after maybe 205, a very negative person was Oleg Proleskovsky. He was the head of administration of president, of Belarusian president. He worked 3 years, and he prepared company again, company to change program in Belarusian literature, not only in school but also in the university. And the first in 2006, 206 appeared new university program of Belarusian literature, prepared by the colleagues Lyudmila Finkova, Tatiana Shamyakina, and Ales Bielsky. They also worked at the same department, and they prepared new program. And now this program is actual in the university. This program is very conservative, and in this program there is now a lot of not a lot of modern authors. It's very interesting to tell what Oleg Proleskovsky in his speech. Minimize to use of work by authors with democratic view. The poems of Nil Gilevich, Ryhor Baradulin, Hinat Buravkin should be replaced with the works of other writers and poets. The monographic chapters devoted to the work of Nil Gilevich, Baradulin, and other writers should be kept to a minimum. It is forbidden to include works with nationalist and political content in the textbooks. The works by Svetlana Alexievich, Sergei Zakonnikov, Mikhail Skobler, Witold Charopka, and other opposite average authors should be deleted from the obligatory and additional list of literature. It was in 2005. And from this time, we see when power administration, the Minister of Education, tried to change the program. First of all, now it is, I have a lot of different facts, and I have a very big text. I'm sorry, I just only to tell you that, first of all, a lot of very important authors were delighted from the history of the Belarusian literature. And young generation absolutely don't have opportunity to know about Vasil Bykov, because in the history of the literature there is only one, some stories from his book Stena, The Wall. And also it is the second important fact that in a lot of immigrants authors also delighted from the books of history of Belarusian literature, like Natalia Arsenyeva, Maciej Siedniow, and also Larisa Geniusz. And if you open the book published in 2012, you can see only such names. If you would like to know about the poetry, you know about only Василий Зоёнок, Янка Сипаков, Анатолий Вертинский, Дукса, Боровикова, Разанов и Пашков. And prose only 3 authors, Пташников, Касько и Карамазов. And dramaturgy, Петрашкевич, Бутромеев и Сергей Ковалев. And in another book, for example, if you look at the part of dramaturgy, you see that for 2 years it was possible to know about Nikolai Rudkovsky, about young modern Belarusian dramaturg, Nikolai Rudkovsky, Dmitry Boguslavsky, Andrei Kurechek. But after 2 years, the program of Belarusian literature again was changed, and it is not possible to know about this author, but appeared a new author by old generation, Anatoly Delendik. And the program has not only been considered short, but most of all these writers were impossible to know about the very important writer for Belarusian literature. The authors of this new created textbook did not purpose the special phase of the development of the literary process in Belarus after 1981, but focused first of all on the biographies of writers and a brief analysis of the selected literature text. Second-rate writers collaborated with the power, became part of the literature canon. All this means that school graduates have a bad knowledge of not only Belarusian literature, but also the Belarusian language. Teachers have lost the opportunity to choose a textbook. Currently, all forced to one textbook recommended by the Minister of Education, and adapt classes to the need and interest of young people. This makes worse the function of the Belarusian language and literature in Belarus and support of Russification of the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrei. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I'm a bit hesitating to open the discussion now, because it seems to me when we start to discuss now, there won't be any time left for Kapitolina. So maybe it would be better if you just give your talk now, and then we, as Valeri already supposed at the very beginning, it would be better to discuss all 3 contributions together in the end. Yeah, would you agree? Oksana showed a textbook. Oksana, would you like to add? It's the okay, she will explain later.
I'm one of the authors.
Ah, okay. Now Kapitolina. Kapitolina Fyodorova is associate professor of Russian studies at Tallinn University, but originally she studied and graduated from St. Petersburg State University and used to work for 15 years at the Department of Anthropology at the European University in St. Petersburg. Actually, Kapitolina is an expert in sociolinguistics and in language contexts, in the context of migration studies. So she has published on Russian Chinese, Russian Finnish, and Russian Estonian language relations. Her contribution today has the title Language Ideology as a Post-Soviet Legacy, the Case of Estonia.
Thank you for introducing me. So yes, I will add another angle in this discussion, and I will focus mostly on language choices and matters of language ideology and language policy. And if you ever listen to Russian media, especially Russian official propaganda, talking about the situation in the Baltic countries, in Estonia in particular, you will be sure that it's mostly about language policy, about how authorities oppress Russian-speaking citizens of this country, not always citizens, because some of them do not have the privilege of being obtaining citizenship and so on. And it's mostly about how Russian schools are closed and how people are deprived of their language rights and so on. So naturally, questions of language policy seem to be very important for this particular region, not other post-Soviet spaces. Well, of course, it has something to do with international relations more than actual situation. But I'm in my study, I deal with what's really going on in Estonia, in particular, and in terms of language policy and language ideology behind those policies. Because traditionally, language policy is understood as what the state does with language or languages, or practical measures taken by authorities to influence the way languages are used in different domains. And as we can assume, the choice of such measures is related to more general ideological paradigms in particular society. And if society is strictly oriented towards nationalism, that's quite different story when it's more about multiculturalism and so on. So these language measures never exist in vacuum. They are always interconnected with all other policies and all social beliefs and norms of the society. And the term language ideology refers to sets of norms and beliefs about language or languages typical for a certain speech community. It means that in a certain society, different people shouldn't necessarily have the same ideas about languages, especially if they have different native, different mother tongues and different experiences in using languages. However, language policy is not limited to state actors, and the state is not the only actor in this field, because in fact, language policies are implemented by different actors on different levels. And business owners and their employees and different organizations, non-governmental organizations and private individuals, they all contribute to the scene. And as we know from some historical examples, sometimes even one active individual can make huge contribution to language revival, for example, as we know in case for Hebrew, or standardization of Norwegian language, for example, and so on. And naturally, beliefs of such people and the attitudes can be different. And ideologies can change over time, and they can retained some influence in certain domains and amongst certain groups and individuals. And in this sense, it's very interesting to study them because we can see at the same time how things change and how they are kept. And data on language ideologies can be obtained using various methods and interviews, polls, experiments, observation, and so on. In my study, I mostly deal with linguistic landscapes, and but I also use other methods and other data. Well, you know, this just interesting example I found recently. It's in Kaluga in Russia, and this old slogan was actually reproduced after the restoration of the building. So it was kept, and those letters were put again, and you can see the process of this. There is a man putting the last exclamation sign in the sentence. So this visual landscape kept these traces of old ideologies, and they are sort of cherished in this case and kept as something important and as a sort of some glorious past. Well, and when I talk about linguistic landscape studies, I mean all cases of written signs placed in public spaces. It's a visual representation of different languages. So I want to talk long about methodology of this study because, yeah, it's another issue. But what is important is that what we see on the streets of the cities is not necessarily correctly reflect what's going on, what people talk, what languages they use, because some languages can be underrepresented, some languages can be overrepresented, and so on, because of power relations in the society. And what is important in terms of language ideology is that Soviet society and post-Soviet society in Russia is dominated by two biases: monolingual bias and what they call a standard language bias. The first one deals with the concept of one person, one language. So it's normal to speak just one language, and all other languages are learned, are imposed, are learned via formal education. And standard language bias deals with the idea that there is only one correct variant for everything, and any deviations from this standard are unwelcome. So there is just one true, one right language, and everything else is sort of evil. And when I talk about language ideology in the Soviet Union, I mean mainly Russian-speaking population, because the situation was different for so-called non-Russians, national cadres, and so on in public, because in the 1970s, it became by default that people in the Soviet Union, if they are not native Russian speakers, should be bilingual in their native tongue and in Russian. Or, of course, they could just shift to Russian, and that's what happened with many speakers of many minority languages. But after collapse of the Soviet Union, native speakers of Russian in most new states suddenly turned into minorities, as it happened in Estonia. And nowadays, officially, Estonia has only one state language, which is Estonian. But de facto, unlike what you can assume from listening to Russian media, Russian is widely used even in official domains. In education, for example, in Estonia, you shouldn't bring, if you come here, you shouldn't translate your documents from Russia into Estonian. You can present them in Russian. It's okay. And full transition to education in Estonian is scheduled only for 2035. And still there are a lot of Russian with schools with Russian as language of education. In this situation, Russian-speaking population of Estonia presents rather interesting case, because they live in a new situation where they are officially a minority, and they have to deal with this situation, and they have to become at least bilingual in Russian and Estonian. At the same time, they still keep quite old heritage from the old Soviet ideology, beliefs, and myth about languages. And I will try to show you some examples how the situation looks like on a practical level, and what people think about it. So I did my study mostly on the border of Ivangorod and Narva, and I will show you just some examples of how different the situation is in these twin cities. Because Ivangorod looks like, well, you cannot find any word in Estonian in Ivangorod. I mean, in Ivangorod linguistic landscape. If you ever find anything not in Russian, it will be in English. But Russian mostly. And even touristic maps use only Russian and some quite poor English translations. And even advertisement for hotel and restaurant in Estonia doesn't use any Estonian words. Even in address, the Estonia is written in English, not in Estonian. It's not Eesti, it's Estonia. So basically, Ivangorod is a sort of outpost of monolingualism. And this is one of my favorite examples, because here you can see that Tallinn is written with one N, and even in English, in Latin alphabet. And if you go to St. Petersburg, you will see the same sign with the distance to Tallinn, but of course in Russian it will be with one N, but in English it will be with double N. But near the border, you see it's like a gesture to Estonia, showing you we don't care about your rules, we stick to our rules of the Russian language. And if you cross the border, you will see quite different linguistic landscapes, different signs. Again, you can find some bilingual signs in Estonian and English, but in most touristic places, everything is trilingual, Estonian, English, and Russian. At the same time, you can find those traces of old language policies from the Soviet time. Sometimes you can see these signs totally in Russian, or these bilingual signs like street names. And you can see that it's on the corner of the street, and on the left there is just Estonian sign, new sign, because it's the main street, and it's on the. If you turn around the corner, you will find this old sign with two alphabets. But if you look at what at advertisement created by private sector, by business, you will see that this bilingualism is everywhere, and actually people mix languages quite freely. And if almost all signs produced by individuals are in Russian, and official signs mostly in Estonian, and everything in between combines two languages. And if you look closer at this advertisement, you will see that some words are in Estonian, some words are in Russian, sometimes they double each other, sometimes they complement each other, sometimes they also include English. Like in advertisement for salsa training sessions, there are English words like lady style and чувственная bachata. Bachata is written in Latin alphabet, чувственная in Russian and Cyrillic alphabet, and so on. And you can see that in reality, people actually are very multilingual. They feel free to combine different languages. But on you can also, in this linguistic landscape, you can see different layers, and mostly the more official and the more, I mean, the more money are involved, the more closer to Estonian it will be, but everything, you know, conducted by hand will be in Russian. So you can see that different actors are involved in this process. And that's one of my favorite examples. It's here you can see that it's Narva, but it's Tavare is Estonia, not Estonia, not Estonski Tavare. It means that Narva is not part of Estonia. It's something like different from other places. And again, that's just how everything operates on everyday communication level. The official form, it's, you know, this thing in public toilet when the cleaners mark when they clean the toilet, and the official form is in Estonian, but almost everything is written inside by hand is written in Russian, because most cleaners are Russian-speaking women. But when we start to talk with people, and I mean, not only people in Narva, but people in Tallinn, and even young Russian speakers, like my students at Tallinn University, you will find many typical language myths popular among them, and they are related, they referred to this more, this old monolingual and standard language biases inherited from the Soviet time. So if you start to discuss the situation with the Russian language in Estonia, you will most definitely, or if you read local Russian-speaking media, you will mostly hear that Russian in Estonia is endangered, of course. It is corrupted by Estonian. Again, it's standard language bias, because languages should be pure and never mixed. Estonian Russian is inferior to the true Russian, meaning Russian is used in Russia. And there are many stories of how perfect Russian students, perfectly Russian students from Russia can speak Russian, unlike the Estonian colleagues and so on. And behind all those sayings, there is an idea that one can't master two languages at the same time, and necessarily one language will win, another will lose. And that's when you start discussing these themes with people in interviews, and if you pay attention to what they post on social media and their comments on social media, you will see that despite the fact that people actually are multilingual and their practice is in their everyday communication, they use at least two languages, and so quite often three languages, because of course most young people know English also quite well. Their ideas about languages still are very monolingually oriented, and they see everything dealing with language contacts and code mixing as unwelcome and bad for the language. In this sense, that's what seems important for me. This mismatch between practice and ideology is important because it also influences issues of official language policies and opposition to these language policies. This growing multilingualism among Russian speakers in Estonia collides with a monolingual ideology inherited from the Soviet time, and as a result, there are many conflicts when people see any attempts to introduce Estonian as a threat to Russian, because languages are seen, the main idea behind this fear of another language is that language contact is seen as a language war, as a zero-sum game. So one should win and one should lose. And people just do not have this idea that they can use several languages at the same time, and it is okay, and no one will be killed. No language will be killed over that. So they do not see it as a language cooperation as this win-win situation. And
Kapitolina,
yes,
conclusion,
I know,
please.
yes, that's actually, that is my conclusion, and I could add more, of course, on how this corresponds to the situation in Russia, where this monolingual and standard language biases are still very strong and even much stronger than in Estonia. But I think that's, for me, it's very interesting. What is very interesting about that is how this Soviet inheritance is still very active despite the reality, the actual reality of multilingualism in nowadays Estonia. So thank you.
Thank you, Kapitolina. If Valeri isn't against, I would propose to have a discussion on these three papers together, because my impression is we could discuss them very well together. It's all about on the ruins of Soviet structures, Soviet literary policy, and language policy. Valeri, is that okay with you? Okay, so I would say some 20 minutes, then we will have 20 minutes for your contribution and 10 minutes for discussion of your talk. Okay, so shall I start? Just to Kapitolina's talk, one question: is it? What do you think? Would it be interesting to ask if there are two types of legacy evolving, in the sense, on the one hand, what you are discussing is the Soviet legacy and Soviet language policy in their minds, but on the level of practice, something completely different. And could this completely different practice also be a kind of legacy, namely the pre-Soviet and what has been practiced also during Soviet times somehow? Could we say that English has replaced, in a sense, German, for instance, and so that there are two legacies competing with each other? And my question to Andrei and Oksana would be also about competition between, in this case, the transformation of the Soviet situation, the split between the official literary policy and underground, has now become a situation, transformed into a situation of competition between two parties competing for the official program, the official canon. So it's important now for the opposition, speaking very generally, to lay claim on the official literary program, the official literary canon, because what they observe is a kind of destruction of the the literary canon of Belarusian literature as it has existed before.
Should I start? Yeah, thank you. That's a really great question about all the legacy, because of course nothing, in terms of beliefs and myth, nothing is ever lost. You can always inherit something from older past and from older past. But I think the situation with English is different from that of German, because German in pre-revolutionary Estonia was the language of German-speaking elite, Baltic Germans, and English is really lingua franca. It's language, it's international language, but not language of some prestigious social group, if we do not mean prestigious group like a constructed group of some foreigners or expats. So they do not have the same meaning for Estonian society. German was mostly the language of elite, and English nowadays is a sort of default language for any educated, default second language for any educated person. Like Russian was in the Soviet Union default language for any non-native Russian speaker. In the late Soviet Union, of course. I'm not talking here about the 30s or the 40s, of course. But again, yes, I think we can look into different traditions inherited from different times, and even again, as I tried to tell, even in the Soviet Union, there were different approaches, and the language ideology of Russian speakers was not the same as those of speakers from republics, from national republics. And so what's really interesting about places such as Estonia, countries such as Estonia, is that here these different traditions, different language ideologies clash as a result of sort of revolutionary event when like magnetic policies changes places. Yesterday, Russian speakers were sort of elite because they came here and they have no reasons to learn Estonian, and just in a couple of days, the situation is reversed and they are minority and they are demanded to learn this small language they have no good feelings about, and so on. So I think this situation is because here we can study how people adjust to this very strange situation of immigration without immigration, of becoming a minority without choosing it, without moving it, and how they deal with it in their reality and in their social mind, in their ideas about that. But of course, all the legacies also are also important, and it has to be seen into. So thank you for the question.
Thank you for your answer. Thank you. Oksana, Andrei, would you like to?
Who the first? Andrei? Oh yeah. I am.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think that in all periods of studying Belarusian literature, we have lost many authors. In Soviet time, the program began. I don't know, but I think I'm 40. I was.
I'm sorry, Oksana, but we don't hear you well, I think.
And now? Now? It will be better?
Yeah.
So I was 10 when the collapse of the was. So I
Oksana, sorry, it's really difficult to understand what you say.
Okay, maybe I use this time.
Andre, yeah.
It's a very good question. Thank you very much, and a very good word, competition, because we see preparing for this conference. I look at the website of this Union of Writers of Belarus, and I found a very interesting text about competition, which writers are very popular now, and this union of Connected with Power would like to tell us that we are very popular, we are number one, and it is a very bad situation now we have, and I don't maybe agree with the word underground literature, because this another kind of union. It is not underground. They official, and it is possible to buy books of these writers everywhere in Belarus. It is not problem, but I think the situation changed now after the Belarusian Revolution in 2020, because as I mentioned, power don't like this people, this kind of thinking, this kind of literature, and problem with this union of writers connected with power, that they don't have a good literature. It is the main problem.
Yeah.
And I'd like to tell that this kind of writers, absolutely, some of them absolutely unknown for a big for the Belarusian people, and it is a big problem. If you have a good literature, it is not problem, but if you have bad literature, second-class literature, it is a big problem for Belarusian literature and situation. And I think that the situation will be bad and bad more. And it is, I don't know, it is, and I agree with you, it is destruction for Belarusian literature. And how to change it? I think only one way: to create a new program and to create new textbook abroad, for example, in European humanitarian university, in Poland and so on, to gather people who would like to do it and to create this new program, new canon, because it is necessary to do, I think. Thank you.
But, and about competition between opposite writers and state writers, I think that it isn't competition, but because there were different power. Opposite writers can't get to the school curriculum, school program. Do you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
And I told that I was one of the author of the school textbook for 10th class. And I think that everything that told Andrei Moskvin, it sounds scary, but it doesn't work in that way. It seems to me that because many teachers at school we have very bad textbooks. All these years, we have very bad textbooks about Belarusian literature. So no, it's good, and our teachers work without textbook. So they every teacher can decides how he or she will work with their pupils or their students, and I know about it because we have new textbook, and we wrote it in 2020, and I know that many schools didn't receive it, and how are you working? What are you doing? We work without textbooks. That's normal. Mm-hmm. So, and about authors in this textbook, I can show, but here about national writers, nationalist writers. This is the first part, 10 class, and will be written second. And in this part, we wrote about repressed writers. So they are in school curricula and they're nationalists, if you like this word. Максим Горецкий, Владимир Дубовка, Янка Купала, Jakub Kolos.
And if it's possible, Oksana, I would like to add that it is necessary also to remember that this program in the school very short. For example, before this reform, different kinds of reform, 72 hours only in 10, 11 classes. And after reform, 53 from 7 to 11. 53, 7 to 11. It means that it is a very, very short program, and it is impossible. And not also very important question. Oksana mentioned that there are some kinds of book. I think two kinds of book. One of book prepared by Oksana and another, it is classical books, but now we have in Belarus second kind of book. It is not the history of Belarusian literature, it is the history of writers. You have only one writer, the second, the third, his biography and short information about his, maybe, I don't know, maybe sometimes not very important poems or novels. And it means that people don't, young generation don't know the history of the, don't know the connection with Belarusian literature with European literature. And the second problem, when you have not a lot of hours in school, it means the teacher, it depends, Oksana, very important, it depends on the teacher. Teacher can take, today I like this writer and I prefer, as the lessons, I ask you read this novel. It's enough, thank you very much, and goodbye. It depends on the teacher. Sometimes it is not, teachers elect not good writers. It is a big problem.
Yeah. And
I also to comment that what Oksana was talking about brilliantly illustrates that policy, language policy, literary policy is not limited to the state authorities. You can prescribe everything, you can give them textbooks, but actual teachers can do more or less what they can do in classes, and so we cannot restrict our study only to official sources. That's I think that's really good point you made.
If there is no control, I mean,
and even even in the Soviet times, there were teachers who managed to talk about, I don't know, Nabokov or and all is possible. Yeah.
Are there any questions or comments? Thomas Meyer, please.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure. I thought maybe I should leave it for later or something to not intervene with this discussion. But I do have a question for Kapitalina, actually a couple, because it was a really interesting talk. I'm wondering, you briefly spoke about the role of English now as a default second language for anybody who is sort of more educated. And I was wondering if there's also sort of a perceivable anxiety among Russian speakers, and maybe particularly among Russian-speaking intellectuals, that English might take over as a general second default language in Estonia and sort of relegate Russian to an even lower space. That was sort of a little bit my impression when I studied in Tartu a couple of years ago. And there were still in Tartu at that point a couple of Russian language seminars going on at the university, but you could notice that it was very much in in the very last stages of fading out, and sort of with this transition of English taking over so much, even compared to Estonian and in higher education, maybe there is sort of actually a perceived anxiety towards two languages there. Could that be?
Oh, I think that's a great question. I will see into it more, because probably as a newcomer and, you know, a person coming from Russia, I cannot see it clearly, because you know, in Russia, English is a big deal, and all these discussions about how mighty Russian language is corrupted by this stupid English is so loud in Russia that comparing to it, everything discussing English in Estonia is, well, maybe I'm losing my vision here, because it's not so prominent. And of course, situation in Tartu and in Tallinn situations are very different, because of course Tartu is more Estonian speaking and Tallinn is very, very much Russian speaking city. And yes, but I think it can be an interesting issue. So well, I have no answer to your question yet, but I will see into it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Valentina Harjun.
Yeah, thank you. I have questions for Oksana and Andrei. You covered almost 30 years of development of Belarusian literature after Belarus got independence, and it looks simply as a continuation of Soviet style of organizing literature life. Andrei at the beginning mentioned that it was few attempts to kind of reframe, reorganize literature life, but it's failed. Can you please specify what attempts were made and why they failed? Was the political pressure the only reason of the failing of those attempts? Second question also for both of you. Oksana mentioned Svetlana Alexievich, but only in one very specific context. I would like to know, I'm just wondering how Svetlana Alexievich and her works are perceived in Belarusian scholarship, and if her works included in university and school curricula. And the last question about the issue of language. I'm wondering how big is a group of Belarusian writers who are reading in Russian, how large this group, and if there is any tension between two groups, Belarusian writers who are writing in Belarusian and Belarusian writers who are writing in Russian. Thank you.
I can tell about Svetlana Alexievich because it is a very important question. Yes, the first time Alexievich appeared in the program in 2016. It was I found it. I tried to find, and I'm looking, and it was only one novel, Tsinky Boys. And only this, and no, I think, I'm sorry, it was before, but 2000, it was Tsinky Boys, it was before, but 2016 appeared a special part of the textbook, Russian literature in Belarus. And Svetlana Alexievich now the part of this textbook, Russian literature in Belarus. But I know that only this, only one book exists in this program. Oksana? And the first question, yes, I think it is, first of all, I think to my mind, I don't know, maybe Oksana don't agree with me, it is political, it is political situation, it is your first question, the most important. It is a fight between different political view, not only on the literature, but first of all development of the country and situation. And the third
about language.
Yes, about language. Yes, the most part of the representative of this this union of writers connected with the power, it is the people who write in Russian. It is a big problem, and you can they Turgenev first of all, and if you also it is very easy, you can find the text of these authors translated into Belarus, but it is translation, it is not original thing. And it is also for the people, it is a big problem because it is not original text, it is not good text. But this literature published, they have a very good financial support from the power. They can publish everything what they would like. It is a big problem. You can, if you go to the bookstore in Minsk, in every city, first of all, you can find a lot of books written by these people, but very little. But I don't know how. I must tell that to compare the book usually written by independent union of writers, one book it is 100 examples. It means that it is only people from one house can read. It is for people who live in one house in Belarus. You understand? It is books printed by grants, different kinds of grants. It is, you understand, this situation, the different situation between official and unofficial. And Oksana, maybe you can add something. Okay. Sorry.
And is something wrong with your sound or what? Could you please say something, and we will check if we hear you. No, we can't.
No, we cannot hear you.
Maybe you try without this earphone.
Do you hear me? Oh.
Yes. Yeah.
And about Svetlana Alexievich at school, I mentioned her autobiographic literature in the part about Maxim Goretsky, but it's only the first part. Chronologically, Svetlana Alexievich isn't in this period, but I mentioned. At the university, every professor can decides about whom he or she want to speak. So there are any control. Will you speak about Alexievich or not? It's your decision. So, next question about Russian and Russian speaking writers and Belarusian speaking writers. I agree with Andrei, but some writers, Russian speaking writers, are different. Are you agreeing with me, Andrei? Maybe from state writers union and maybe and those who are not from the state, those who are from the state writers union, they want to be Russian writers. They are very often are members of the Russian writers unions. And those who are not from the state unions, they are try to publish their book at two languages. So they try to get into the Belarusian literature. And Svetlana Alexievich wrote her books in Russian language, and this is also our problem. Maybe she wrote it not for Belarusian public, not for Belarusian readers, but to the whole world, but Russian language.
Mm-hmm. So I think we have got a very interesting and important impressions about the really complicated situation in Belarus concerning literary policy, language policy, and literary canon. So and not only literary canon, but different directions of poetics also. So it was very much implied. It was in what Andrei said, the politicization of literature and politicization as the most important aspect of literature as such. So the division between authors concerning their political direction, and it's not about poetics, but it's of course very complicated, and it was very useful, Oksana, also what you told us about the competition between different textbooks, and also the difference between what is written in the textbooks and what is the practice in classes. So thank you very much also for the discussion. And now to our to the last speaker in this panel, Valery Vyugin. It's not necessary to introduce him. He is organizer-in-chief of this conference. Valery is a very distinguished expert in Soviet literature, and especially in Andrei Platonov, his very important monograph on Platonov, Poetica Zagadki, but also other aspects of the Soviet period. And one, he has a huge number of articles, and one of his recent publications is the edited volume on the Second All-Union Writers' Congress, with very important materials and articles. This event in 1954, which was really important for the developments in the Thaw period. Valery, your contribution today has the title How to Heal the History, Contemporary Russian Fiction from the Perspective of the Literary Awards. The floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I hope you see my presentation and hear me well.
Perfect.
Okay, I will start. In my paper, I will focus on 4 novels published in Russia during the last 5-7 years. Each of them was included in a short or long list of Russia's prominent literary prizes in 2019. Just a moment. 2019, when I began to work on this subject. All of them share both the interest to the Soviet history and, as I believe, the key for situation in contemporary Russia, principles of rethinking of the past. Thus, I will seek to show, on the one hand, how different these novels are in form, and on the other hand, how similar they are ideologically and ethically. It may be suitable to present the novels in the order based on the strength of their author's intention to terrify their audience of the Soviet past. I will start with the case of the 0 degree of such a wish. Vasily Aksionov's novel 10 Visits to My Love is autobiographical. The action set in the late USSR in Yelanya village in Middle Russia. There are 3 clearly detectable chronotopes in Aksionov's novel. They are the pre-Soviet history, the Soviet history of the 1960s, and the present moment from the perspective of which the narrator depicts and evaluates the past. Aksionov presents the pre-Soviet history as a kind of utopia. Our forefathers, Cossacks, pathfinders, he comments, knew well how to choose the right place to build villages. Also, one often called the pre-Soviet Russia the Dark Kingdom. There was a Paris school in our village. Now the school is destroyed. According to Aksionov's narration, the inhabitants of the Soviet countryside of the 1960s did not have too much job to do. The author is mostly interested in their entertainments and cultural preferences, which are very diverse. They listen classic Russian operas and at the same time the Beatles, Creedence, the Rolling Stones, etc., etc. The village Yelan lives, as it seems, out of the influence of the Soviet state ideology and is not affected by the party apparatus. The narrator, the protagonist, is also an expressly apolitical person. The author deputes the political discussions to the father's generations. The fathers, for instance, quarrel a lot about the past of under Stalin. One of the Aksionov's characters admires Stalin, another, a victim of repression, boiled over with rage at him. But every time after the arguments, they reconcile with help of vodka. The political and social contradictions are ousted from Aksionov's version of the Soviet countryside life to the outer world. For example, the above-mentioned Paris school was destroyed by an external, unnamed enemy. Or another illustration, if a village girl one moment is sexually assaulted, only migrant workers, but not local people, are able to commit such a crime. The religious values are more important for Aksionov's characters than political. If at the beginning of the novel, narrator states that he does not believe in God and just asks the universe for mother's health, at the end of the novel, after military service near the ocean, he feels by his skin that it was the God who created the world. In contrast to Aksionov's in contrast to Aksionov's prose, Alexander Arkhangelsky's novels, Verification Bureau, published first in 2008, is full of the Soviet symbols, rhetoric, and practices. Arkhangelsky described the Moscow of the 1980s, Olympic Games, and this is certainly is not a utopia. His protagonist is a student. The collision is based on the series of big and tiny confrontations between the state apparatus and the opposing to it intelligentsia. At the same time, what can attract the reader's attention already in the first paragraphs of the novel is the freedom of information. Despite all restrictions and censorship, Arkhangelsky's characters are able to reach the prohibited literature, listen to the Soviet West radio voices, be involved in rock culture, etc., etc., etc. This definitely reminds Aksionov's writing with its similar heterogeneous cultural landscape of Brezhnev's era countryside. Another interesting thing about Arkhangelsky's novel is that these characters, his characters, do not only partisan intelligentsia, but the officials also live as if in two worlds simultaneously. There is an expressive female character, high-ranked party member in the novel. She looks as a personification of Soviet power during the party court hearing, in which the protagonist participates as an accused person. But at the moment when she and the protagonist stay alone in an empty room, the high-ranking party member takes from her pocket the fourth cigarette Camel and lights it up with the unpatriotic lighter Zippo. This is one more contradiction of Soviet life presented by Arkhangelsky, antagonism between private and public spheres. The protagonist is guilty and consequently under threat to be sent to Afghanistan war, because she is an openly religious person. Thus, the faith is one of the most important topics for Arkhangelsky in this piece of writing. And this again remains absolutely different in form Aksionov's idyllic village prose. I began with the thesis that Arkhangelsky creation full of the antagonism, but one can find in his novel another, perhaps not so explicitly presented trend. His novel is about reconciliation, and the idea of reconciliation embodied first of all in the figure of Vladimir Vysotsky, the famous Russian poet, singer, theater and cinema actor, loved by the officials and ordinary people, and thus having the status of a kind of medium between them. Vladimir Vysotsky's death, July 25, 1980, coincide with the Moscow Olympic Games. In the final episode of the Arkhangelskий's novels, his protagonist happened to be among a huge crowd following Vysotsky's funeral procession. He watched how a person from a crowd is handing out to others Vysotsky's last verses. The author focuses on a militsioner, a Soviet policeman, who also is striving for Vysotsky poetry. A short dialogue between two characters is indicative. But you are, forgive me, a militsioner. Militsioner turned red in face and asked offendedly, "Do you think the militianers are not humans?" This is a way how, in Arkhangelskий's eyes, Vysotsky's death turns to be a symbol of the hope and national reconciliation. The easiest way to face the actually frightening history in contemporary Russian fiction is to read popular Guzel Yakhina's writing. Her novel My Children, published in 2018, is also a story of love on the background of the history of a settlement of the Soviet Volga Germans during the period from 1918 to 1938. Just before the Bolsheviks seized power, Yakhina's protagonist leaves the settlement with his sweetheart on account of her parents and village community did not approve their marriage. They live alone on the other side of the Volga River, fascinated by one another. But this idyll ends soon. One night, armed robbers attacked their house, raped the young woman. After that, she became pregnant and later died during the delivery, leaving a girl. At first, the protagonist was indifferent to the child, if not hated her, but gradually he became deeply attached to her. Several years later, another child, an orphan, appeared in his house, and the history from hate to love repeated itself. During all this time, protagonist regularly visited Volga's German settlement, watching the change that the Bolsheviks rapidly brought, that devastation and vanishing of village inhabitants, Germans. One moment, his now beloved children were taken away from the protagonist and placed in the Soviet orphanage, детский дом. Soon he was arrested and sent to a labor camp. Thus, Yakhina's story seems to be, in common sense and in my sense, horrible and full of despair. Nevertheless, it includes a series of motifs and allegorical details which make the situation ambitious. Another important character which Yakhina presents in her novel is Stalin. In general, her portrait of the Soviet leader is based on stereotypical assumptions. His world is law, nobody is allowed to argue with him, he is paranoidally suspicious of others and ruthless. Yakhina's Stalin is responsible for widespread repressions which she so expressively depicts. Yet, there is no any sign of disapproval of him in her novel. Yakhina narrates her story objectively, without any marks of ethical evaluation. When the narrator claims about repression, we can win the future war if only we clean the organism from all its various illnesses. The reader is not given any hints to judge whose these words are and whether the author agrees with this thesis or not. Definitely, cruel Soviet regime under Stalin is not presented in by Yakhina as an absolute evil. Taken away from their father, the protagonist's children are happy in the orphanage, which is described as a kind of a children utopia where children need not fathers. Thus, Yakhina embodies in her novel well-known Soviet slogan, "Children are our future," or in another words, the future is for children. But if the future is for children, adults can be sacrificed. Thus, Yakhina's Stalin we can conclude, just realize the mission of cleaning the world from old ill adults for young orphans. In Yahine's novel, the protagonist and Stalin are opposite characters by their social statuses and their missions as a victim and as executioner. But they, paradoxically, from the common sense of point of view, do the same thing. They are sooner allies than enemies. They build the new world. The protagonist reluctantly continues the work for his and other children despite all deprivations and humiliation. Taking this logic into account, a key episode at the end of the novel does not look strange. Yahina narrates how, just before his arrest, the protagonist is drowning in the Volga. It looks like a passive suicide attempt, but another point is now more important. At the bottom of the Volga, or perhaps in his imagination, he sees a lot of people and things. Some of them are those who vanished from the German village, his former neighbors. Some have been here since ancient times, Russian foreigners, friends, foes, all together. All of them stay unmoving, but entirely intact. They whole. This picture clearly alludes to Russian philosopher Nikolai Fedorov image of a museum in which dead are kept safely for resurrection, and to Andrei Platonov's writing, who actively popularized Fedorov's ideas. Among persons familiar to him, the protagonist found both Bolsheviks and their enemies, both victims and their executioners. In death, all are equal, and consequently is, as it were in Aksionov's and Arkhangelsky's novels, are reconciled one another. Thus, all three writers, as we can see, follow the same ethical strategy: reconciliation. There is no place for paradise and hell in their ethical evaluation of Soviet history. Unlike Aksionov's and Arkhangelsky, Yahina does not pay too much attention to Christian religion. Yet another religion plays a significant role in her novel. In the scene of drowning, Yahina depicts how her character, in his fantasy at least, dissolves in the Volga and through this unites and became the same with the earth. In other words, Christianity in Yahina's narrative has been replaced with pantheism, which, by the way, also can be found among Andrei Platonov's basic motifs. Thus, the idea of reconciliation and faith are shared by all three very different authors. At the end of my talk, I will touch upon the most horrifying historical piece of writing which was nominated a book prize in 2019. And I mean Vladimir Kononov's novel Uprising, Uprising. I missed this. Uprising, I missed this picture, but it doesn't matter. Uprising, published in 2019. I risk to identify the genre of Uprising as war camp or prison horror, also not fantastic, but mimetic. It is based on the biography of a real person who spent a big part of his life in Soviet and German camps and prisons. Kononov describes starvation, death, tortures, humiliation, severe wounds, and decay of human bodies in detail. I am not sure that we can find narratives concentrated so much on stuff like this in the Soviet fiction, and I think that we still rarely meet them in the post-Soviet fiction also. In contrast to Yahina's characters, Kononov's protagonist from the beginning to the end is in conscious opposition to the Soviet regime. The author seems also does not have any illusion about Stalin and his gang. The protagonist's father was arrested and disappeared in 1930s. Any attempts to find him were unsuccessful. During the war, being a brave officer, protagonist was first wounded and taken a prisoner. After the war, he was arrested and sent in Russian special camp in Norilsk, where he became a leader of uprising in 1933, shortly after Stalin's death. This sequence of events from Kononov's narratives can be characterized as mimetic horror, but there is a significant genre component of another kind in this novel, which drastically changed the situation. This is a story of love and love and a sort of a family idyll. The point is that at the end of the war, after given an opportunity to escape, Kononov's protagonist found himself in Belgium, where he met a young Russian woman with 2 children who also were former prisoners of war. They were happy together. Perhaps for the first time in his life, Kononov's protagonist had good living condition. Moreover, he, as a gifted engineer, was rather popular among Belgian businessmen. His new family had all chances for happy life and suddenly discovered paradise. But suddenly he decided to come back to Russia, and his wife supports him. Thus, very soon he found himself in the camp in Norilsk. Thus, Kononov, exactly as other above-mentioned writers, narrates a story of reconciliation. And in this case, rhetoric of reconciliation is also supported by religious discourse. Kononov's character is not a religious person, but the narrator stresses how once in his childhood he was impressed by the grandmother's old believers' icons presenting the hell. As a result, during all his life, he described the Soviet regime and Germans during the war as red and black devils. Moreover, at the end of the novel, after releasing from the prison, he took refuge in a quiet place nearby Old Believers community, where he peacefully died. Let us sum up. As we can see, all the above-mentioned writers, in spite of great differences in their writing in form, from the perspective of rhetoric, are doing the same. Recycling the Soviet past, they seek to normalize the Soviet history, appealing to the idea of reconciliation and to religion. Not only they, a number of contemporary Russian writers follow the same strategy. Honestly, this fact is a little bit shocked me. In a similar way, I was surprised then in the beginning of 2000s when I suddenly discovered that many of my colleagues from the Department of the Soviet Literature in Pushkinsky Dom, the department atheistics by definition, were or became religious. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Valeri, for this very interesting talk. We have some few, but still some minutes for discussion. When you were comparing these novels and these authors, I was all the time thinking about other authors also, and and preparing my questions. If you think we could generalize your thesis, but that is what you did in the end, actually. I mean, for me, it would be interesting maybe to put the question in a bit different direction. So asking about poetics, asking about aesthetic strategies in this context, and asking how maybe a generalization in terms of reconciliation can be seen together with poetical strategies, or a second question, if reconciliation or normalization, as you call it, is always the same. So aren't there different strategies, different attempts to somehow integrate the problematic Soviet history or its most problematic periods into a continuum? Are there, if you think of authors like, let's say, Vodolaskin, or what about Maria Stepanova, completely different direction in terms of poetics, but maybe you could...
Yes,
Yeah.
Susanna, I am talking about the novels very different. If you look, if we consider their poetics, very different. But there is general shared tragedy we can find in all of these piece of writings. This tragedy, this is not a poetic tragedy. This is not about poetics. This is about rhetoric and about recycling in economical sense of these words. These writers always want to be successful, and they also so. This, in my eyes, the situation is the following. There is a group of writers, very talented, gifted, and very quite popular in the special part of audience. They position themselves as serious writers, yeah, like Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, so on and so on. This is serious Russian big literature. They position themselves among this environment. But if we look back at the 1920s years, we can identify the same rhetoric tragedy. This tragedy links to the poetic of horror, mimetic horror, how I mentioned above about this strange term. Платонов, Артем Веселый, Василий Гроссман, Пельняк, each of these writers tried to say following to Soviet power. I see blood of revolution, but I accept it. If we look at the attempts to be successful by which take contemporary Russian writers, we found the same situation. I see Stalin is blood man, but I accept my history, despite of all the blood. This is a main rhetoric tragedy, but poetic can be very, very different, absolutely different. But different and the same, this is a sort of realistic poetic realism, a sort of realism which reminds me social realism, or maybe social symbolism. They play with allegorism, a lot of allegorism in their writing. There is two levels of narratives in these books, and this is not avant-garde poetics. What units all of these writers, including Vodolaskin, this religious and new symbolism, to say. That is my answer for you, Susanna. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, Valeri. We are a bit running out of time, but I don't want to stop the discussion if there are. Yeah, Tim Atanucci. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for this very interesting talk. I'll just ask a question from left field, which is from this realm of critical theory. I'm not sure if you work with that, but it seemed interesting in this term symbolic realism. Is this difference between symbol and allegory at all something that you work with? The question of how much the symbol is invested with new meaning, or Walter Benjamin has a theory of allegory, which is about the emptying of meaning. And is this something that could be useful for distinguishing writers on the side of whether they reconcile or whether they are critical in their approach to history.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Tim, for this unpredictable for me question, but it is a very important question for me. The point is that in my paper, I do not make any difference between allegorism and symbolism. This is the same for me in my paper. But I would like to make a confession that the theory of symbolism or allegorism is one of my subject which I studied quite a lot of time because of my interest to Andrei Platonov. When we read interesting writers, they can suggest them some ideas how to think about theory of literature, and there is here the lost languages play important role. We do not have in German, in English languages, the words which we have in Russia. Perhaps we do not have. This word is inосказание, to say in one way and in another way, to say one thing and say another thing at the same time. And I like these words very much, and I have a theory of inосказание in my mind, and I published 2 or maybe 3 articles about this subject, but they are in Russian. But thank you for your question. I think that allegorism is very important for Soviet literature since the beginning, since socialist realism, not before, and we continue this tradition or recycle it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valery. Inосказание is a very important term. I agree, but figurative speech would be somehow the equivalent of it. But it's, inосказание is,
perhaps.
Very beautiful. Dear colleagues, I think, I don't know, Valery, I mean, you are the organizer, and Julia also. We are supposed to have a break at this point. Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So we should stop here. Thank you very much for all the very interesting contributions and also for the discussion, and see you again in about 25 minutes.